Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you Marjorie and Tara for putting this together. I think right off of the bat, one of the things that, was clear to me was that like as much as this dialogue is happening and as much as we have like these panel discussions and these resources being shared, like the fact that Asian American artists aren't sharing space within a classic art space in this way. And so it feels really special that we're all brought together like this. And I've really enjoyed sharing virtual space with these other artists. I'm currently based in Los Angeles. I am a multidisciplinary artist that primarily works in film video. And I just finished my MFA at Cal Arts. And so this body of work that is on the Stamp Gallery's website is actually what would have been my thesis show, which would have been 2 weeks into the pandemic. So I just like so acutely remember, being in the throes of install and like prepping for install when the pandemic hit. And then also having that really privatized experience, because I feel like people within institutions were like on an external level most affected initially, because the institutions were like the educational institutions were the first to close. And so that was definitely really interesting. But this body of work is a study in racial melancholia and racial grief, and examining how and why we fixate and even devour that which we are excluded from. And I sort of speak through these ideas through the idea of avatarism of this Chinese cowgirl who sort of melancholically is fixated upon the American West, because biopolitically that is a space that never belongs to her. So there is this piece, Inauguration, where she speculatively becomes inaugurated into the Cowboy Artists of America, which is a white brotherhood. And then that sits in direct contrast to pieces like the White Vegetable series, in which, the white cabbage, which in Chinese is bai cai, which directly translates to white vegetable, that becomes the object of melancholy, in which it becomes regurgitated because, first it is devoured and then it becomes this object of repulsion. So I'm going to read from this essay that sort of is the theoretical framework of the work, titled Avatarism, Affect, Melancholia, and Objecthood in Staged Absences of a Chinese Cowgirl. Just a brief excerpt, because I just have 2 minutes left. Yellow peril and its residue within the cultural imaginary of the United States left the Chinese body in the United States with limited position takings and with little choice but to, as David Palumbo puts it, engage in recovery from racism. In order to redeem the yellow body from a history of exclusion and degradation as a villainous other, model minority affect was developed as a strategy or coping mechanism for assimilation, acceptance, and survival. Kei Hyojin Yoon elaborates upon Palumbo's concept of recovery from racism through model minority affect as such. Asian Americans are called upon to internalize the myth of meritocracy and thereby perform appropriate or normative emotional dispositions, diligence, self-sacrifice, political passivity, and acquiescence. While these affects may not at first appear to line up with traits belonging to America's pioneering individual, they represent an ideal American disposition, identificatory lures that outsiders in particular may style themselves after in efforts to accrue symbolic capital. Model minorities are seen to adapt themselves quite readily to such ideals, praised for their easy assimilation to American ideologies of hard work and self-determination, ostensibly confirming their recovery from racism. The notion that the very identificatory layers that outsiders may fashion themselves after to assimilate into Americanism do not line up with that of the pioneering individual suggests an unchanging power dynamic between the outsider and the frontiersman. The heroic individualist white pioneer is positioned as the distributor of symbolic capital, exempt from producing the affect required of minorities longing for acceptance. In this regard, while model minority affect serves to valorize American exceptionalism and settler identity, it will never inherently be seen as American in and of itself. Thank you. You can all email me if you want the full essay, which is 20 pages.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I will include the link of her essay, Sage Absences, onto the website within our resources and further readings section. And thank you so much for your reading. So now I would like to hand over the mic to Payal Kumar.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Payal Kumar. I use they, them pronouns, and I am, I guess, a medical advocate. I help manage, or I do manage the gender affirming hormone therapy program over at the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts. And then outside of that, I'm a community organizer around immigrant communities, particularly around South Asian and Asian American community organizing. And I'm also an artist. And so I'm really thankful to UMD, to Marjorie, Tara, and everyone who's made this space possible. There's so much magic in being able to share space with so many radical, amazing Asian and Asian American artists, and particularly seeing our conversations and perspectives come together through the curation is really, really special. So thank you all for being here. So a lot of the work that I do really deals with the materialization of power along different lines. So whether we're thinking about race or gender, class, I'm really interested in the ways in which power goes from being something that's socially constructed or just an identity to really being something that's materially violent, and in a lot of ways, plays a large role in structuring how we interact with each other, but also how we interact with systems larger than just any individual. And so, what I mean by that is really thinking about the sort of powers that exist and how they shape things around immigration, how they shape gentrification, who's able to move into certain neighborhoods, how organizations and corporations are able to determine who is a model minority and who is unwelcome or not a model, and how much that is stratified along the lines of, money or skin color or even gender, and thinking about who's seen as a threat and who isn't seen as a threat. So for me, the model minority myth is a really fascinating point to press on, and it really comes out during this moment of pandemic, where we're seeing the ways in which our communities and people who look like me are being mobilized and are being used as a wedge, and has historically been the case, are being used as a wedge to really push on to issues of anti-Blackness, policing, caste discrimination, homophobia, and so many other things. And within the South Asian diaspora, I find it really powerful to think about how I can visually represent this disconnect, because so much of the sort of Indian government's project or the representation we get within the diaspora is based on a very particular kind of narrative. It's someone who's light-skinned, upper class, engineers, doctors, Hindus, North Indians. There are so many ways in which very particular narratives get exported out to the larger global, community. And as a diaspora, if we're not critical and vigilant about the representation that we're getting and about the ways in which our diasporas are structured through histories of immigration and racism, we end up at a point where we are not able to really represent ourselves and the depth and the radical energy that we have within our communities to fight back against these issues. So as a visual artist and organizer, my visual language really draws from a lot of the Desi folk art of the villages that my family is from. So things like Madhubani art, Kalamkari printing, and other forms of folk art that have been practiced in these villages for a long time, mixed with, a lot of, I think, more contemporary influences. In particular, I love Americana tattooing. So I kind of like to bring together things like bold lines, limited color palettes, and a lot of sort of 2D imagery to bring out explorations of issues like embodiment, capitalism, and how we can really interrogate our relationships to whiteness or Asianness. So one of the series that I presented today is really about fetishism or bondage, sadomasochism, whatever you want to call it. It's this idea of looking at sexual moments or intimate moments as a place where we can actually control the power dynamics that are being pushed onto us. Moving through space as a brown, hairy, non-binary person, I'm subject to so many ways in which I'm seen as submissive, or I am expected to be submissive to particular gazes. But in moments of intimacy, and particularly through the language of sexual exploration, I have the space of really naming those power dynamics and playing with them in a really interesting and integrative way. So through my series, I wanted to intentionally be explicit. I wanted to intentionally make people uncomfortable and present these images of BDSM in relation to traditional symbols of South Asian domesticity as well as femininity, and kind of look at what it means for the submissive to gaze back and for us to actually claim and kind of take ownership of our sexuality and the ways in which we're objectified or not objectified. And so with that, as you navigate through this space, I really invite you to think about how we can undo power dynamics that are placed on us, whether we want them or not, and to really challenge ourselves to think about how we can imagine better, whether it's in a private space or a public space, but thinking about how we navigate with our bodies and with our communities to do better for all of us. Thank you.
A round of applause. Thank you so much, Payal. That was such a wonderful talk, and I will definitely challenge myself to imagine the spaces that I embody and move throughout as well. Without further ado, I will introduce Selena Lee. Next, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Payal. And also big thanks to Marjorie for organizing this whole thing. I'm really excited to be a part of this group of artists. And I guess with the work I have in this exhibit, I wanted to focus on depicting my experience as a Chinese American on different scales. So we see from the video still training. I thought I could share my screen, but or it was suggested that I should by an audience member, but I don't think I can. It's the performance video in the pool. It's an underwater interview and monologue, and in that we're discussing both injury and and I discuss some of the discrimination I was facing during my athletic career. The reason why we're in the pool is because if you're training for something and if you get hurt physically, the pool becomes kind of like a haven, and you can aerobically still have an alternative way to train without getting hurt. And so I think at the time this was a really important thing for me to do, because it took a while for me to reckon how much race had impacted my experience in athletics, because you're really focused on succeeding and standing out, that you don't often see that sometimes those systems of coaching or like really toxic team culture are systems that can work against you. And so my other two pieces in the show, Fox News in Chinese, as the name suggests, is the complete opposite approach to that. It's a really direct performance series that I'm doing with my mom. And what we're doing is in the video, you're gonna see, and I think that was on the marketing materials for this show, you're gonna see Fox News clips chosen from their virality based on the word China, which in conservative media has become this like trigger word for like distrust or fear. So basically I talked to a fact checker to pick out what sorts of interesting clips there might be, and then I speak these statements to Siri, who translates them into Chinese, and then my mom uses the translated Chinese statement and translates it back into English. So your result with that is often kind of weird or the exact opposite of what the initial Fox News statement was. So yeah, this is still a work in progress. I don't think I mentioned I'm currently at my parents' house in Atlanta, and I'm a recent grad from CMU, Carnegie Mellon University. So this is my first work out of college, and it's gonna become a printed series on paper, and hopefully you guys can help us with getting the word out so we can in some way keep fact checking Fox News. So yeah.
Thank you, Selena. I really love all two of your pieces, three of them, if you include the paper performance series. And I thought that translating Fox News was such a explicit way to demonstrate anti-Asian sentiments, especially within popular media. So I thought it was very lovely, and I loved your pieces. But thank you so much for sharing, and I'll hand it off over to Niba. Okay, ready. And yes, good luck on publishing your series.
Hi, everyone. I just want to reiterate a big thank you to Marjorie and Tara for putting on this exhibition, and to all the other artists. Just like being here listening to you guys is amazing. I was really excited to see, or like for Marjorie to reach out to me about this exhibition, because it's just like definitely comes at a really prompt time, and is really exciting to be in this space with all these like Asian American creatives. And it really comes out in talking to her how like passionate she is about this project and how much she really wants it to be a space for all of us. I am currently still in college. I'm a senior next year at Stanford, and I am still in the Bay Area. I was born and raised here in the South Bay. And a lot of my art, or like what I speak to, comes from really being a part of these Asian American bubbles growing up, right? Like I have mostly had Asian friends all my life. Like I have been surrounded by people who look like me, who understand my culture and background. But like growing up, going to like these schools in the Bay, like being around all these people with similar backgrounds, I'm realizing more and more like what voices the Silicon Valley uplifts in its like Asian Americanness. Like Payal was saying, how like I only see North and South Indians of very specific background, how there's so much diversity even within South Asian American, right? There's Indo-Caribbean folks, there's folks from like Uganda, Kenya, who also share Indian heritage. There's folks who are Punjabi, who are all these marginalized identities and religions that I never grew up seeing. And a lot of my art comes from meeting these people in college, having these conversations and realizing that there's so much diversity within my own identity, that there's so much diversity within the Asian American identity that often goes unseen in favor of this model minority myth. And like geography is so part of the model minority myth that I've internalized and that I've accepted my whole life. And a lot of my art is about like breaking past that and trying to have these really difficult conversations with people who share like my privileges and my spheres. A lot of my art is usually about like my friends, people I talk to, but I think COVID has been a really unique opportunity to really think about myself and my positionality in all of these conversations. So a lot of my pieces are self-portraits that I've been doing for like the first time. I've never really done self-portraits before. And a lot of them are exploring just like me being in my childhood home again and like the anxieties and difficulties that come with that, especially like interacting more with older generations that I wouldn't be doing in college. I just want to check time here. Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, and I think something I'm trying to carry with me in my art and in like artistic spaces like this is that I feel like there's definitely a trend right now or a theme where the public or people in general are calling to artists to comment on the pandemic, comment on racial solidarity in these times. But I also want to think past that and be like, it's not the artist's or the activist's job to tell you how to mobilize. Like I definitely stand for like understanding how you can impact your spheres or stand up for these ideas in the bubbles that you belong in, right? Like I was saying this before, but I'm not an art student, I'm an engineering student. And I think I want to carry like my artistic activism, like these spheres I interact with in just like understanding the like racism and lack of diversity that are like so insidious in the like engineering fields and the academic fields that I'm a part of. Yeah, I think that's all I have, but I just like would love to know if any of you resonate with me or have anything to talk about. I'm sure my socials and like my email will be linked in the exhibition, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Niba. And I really appreciate you acknowledging that and sharing your story about how the Asian American population is very much fragmented, it's very vast, very diverse. I guess like when I initially came up with this curatorial statement, I used the acronym Asian American Pacific Islander, and it wasn't until I was almost like choosing the pieces that I did not tap into Desi and South Asian artist spaces, which I thought was such a disservice for a show about Asian Americans and their experiences. So I really, I asked my friend Gunva and Micah to perhaps share her contacts with me, and she provided a list of wonderful Desi and South Asian artists, and I was like, oh my god, thank you. And it's like that type of representation, putting into conversation within like the larger population identity of Asian American was like one of my goals with this project. And thank you so much for touching on that. And without further ado, I would love to pass it on to our last speaker of tonight, Antonius Bowie.
Ciao everyone, my name is Antonius Bowie. I am a queer polydisciplinary Vietnamese American artist, and I'd like to thank Marjorie, Tara, and all the exhibiting artists for creating the space, for bringing 35 people together in the time of COVID. It feels really special to be digitally meeting. One of my pieces is 1/1000th, which is part of an annual dedication in front of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in DC. I do this collectively with a group called the Missing Peace Project, which is a national intergenerational ongoing movement along other Southeast Asian artists, writers, researchers. So it's very interdisciplinary. And whenever I create, I think about Maya Angelou's quote, "I come as one, but stand as 10,000. Because I'm very aware that I wouldn't be able to create my work without an entire canon of actively erased, silenced, and neglected Asian Pacific Islander American artists. I think about how we aren't able to conceptualize an Asian Pacific Islander American futurism because we don't understand our own background. We constantly have to begin from ground zero when it comes to the conversation. Like, why aren't we over the model minority myth right now? Like, I just don't understand. And so as much as I adore this platform and show, I'm really hoping that this will be the last one, because we need to move forward. We need to be standing alongside our Black brothers and sisters, because the model minority myth is anti-Black. And I think for me, having this work up right now feels more poignant than ever, because I just lost my last grandparent 2 weeks ago. And so I'm currently thinking about what it means to lose an entire generation, and how my family's history is so rooted in US imperialism and militarism, because my parents and grandparents are all Vietnamese refugees. And how they came here and assimilated, or aspired to assimilate. They wanted to embody whiteness. And along the way, they became the most anti-Black, the greatest Trump supporters, and continue to perpetuate this corrupt model minority myth. And so I'm really hoping that we, as this generation and all the future generations, continue to cultivate an atmosphere of, I don't know, like justice, liberty for all APIA folks. Let's continue to confront the anti-transness, the anti-homophobia. Let's continue to really push for conversations within our families, as difficult as they are. And let's get to the point and just stand alongside our Black brothers and sisters, because the model minority myth has already done enough damage, and we can't afford to lose any more time if everyone is meant to reach liberation. So I just like to thank each and every single one of you for being here. And I hope that you all continue to find sustainable ways of being present, of being active, and staying politically involved in the time of COVID. I know it's really difficult, but we have amazing artists out there providing visions, amazing curators like Marjorie bringing us all together. And I look forward to just supporting each and every single one of you along the way. And please don't hesitate to reach out if there's ways that any of us can be of service. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Antonius. And I really appreciate your intimacy, and also in sharing your story and your experiences, but also the call to action for all of us in this room to really think about Asian American futurisms. Like you said, the model minority myth is very much anti-Black. It's rooted in that white supremacy concept, and the concept of system. And I would like to conclude with saying that let us take this exhibition, these works, these artworks, and try to apply it within our activist spaces, within our art activism spaces, to, I apologize, and harness that collective care and energy within, throughout, nationally and internationally as well. Thank you. And with that, our opening reception is coming to a close. You all have the link to the exhibition. Tara will drop it in the chat one more time. And this is the start of a month-long showcase at Stamp Gallery. And it will close on September 5th, but it will be archived so you can view it anytime later. We have a Padlet guest book, and if you want to drop any of your thoughts and initial impressions on the show as well. But thank you so much for your patience, your energy, the love, and such resource, the collective resource and gathering in this space. I know that in the virtual world it's very hard to feel connected sometimes, but within the 5 artists that of the show. So Antonius, Niba, Selena, Stephanie, and Payal, I really feel that like Asian American artists will really rise to prominence if they weren't already. Yeah, thank you. And I would like to have a round of applause for everybody. So feel free to leave the Zoom room as you wish, but let's just celebrate. And yeah, thank you.